What advice would you give to someone who's considering doing what you do, becoming an independent media commentator? What advice would you give them?
Oh gosh. What advice? Well, I've had people ask me for advice in the past, and I've always just said you have to be yourself and you have to express your opinions, and you can't be afraid of backlash. I mean, I get backlash all the time. So you can't be afraid of backlash. You can't be afraid. And that's, when I first went into it, it was in the early 2019. And I knew I wanted to get into politics. And so I spent the year prior working for kind of political news, kind of newsletter and kind of at websites that were just kind of startup-y. And they were Democrat, established, really liberal left Democrat. And, I was your casual, normal person who had had a normal job, not a political job, had a regular person job. And so I could only pay enough attention to news like anybody else, mildly. I read headlines, skimmed articles here and there, but the only thing I knew was what the establishment fed me, what mainstream fed me. So I went into but I knew I wanted to do politics. So I knew, when I went into it, I thought, okay, I read some of these headlines, I kind of know what's going on. But then as I was doing the job and actually needing to research to write articles, I would start, I'd get on a story and then I would really research and I'd be like, oh my gosh, this is not at all what the mainstream media is saying. Like this story is nothing like what they're claiming. And okay, so I started off super establishment-y and super mainstream media, but trying to be kind of different. And the more I got into it, I was like, oh my gosh. So when I decided to start my own show, it was because I had a falling out with the organization I was working with. They just, over the year, I had changed so much in my viewpoints. And at the end, they just thought I was right-wing because I just wasn't agreeing with the mainstream liberal viewpoints. But I knew I wasn't right-wing. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to launch this YouTube channel and we're going to see. And I'm really afraid. I was afraid. I just thought, I don't think anybody shares my viewpoints. They're very different. They're not right or left. I don't know. And so I just started, and it ended up being, I was really scared. I'm not going to lie. And it ended up being wildly popular. I mean, people suddenly, my first video got like 1,000 views out of nowhere. And I was like, wow. And then the second one got like 2,000 views, and it just grew and grew and grew to where by month 2, I was getting 100,000 views on a video. And I'm like, whoa, people are gobbling this up. Like I was so scared. But I think the moral of that story is you just have to speak what you believe, what you actually think, your actual opinions. Don't try to fall in line with some narrative that you think is popular. Have guts, get out there and say what you think, say what you really, truly think, and then let the audience decide. And some people, they do that. I see a lot of creators that do that, but their genuine opinion is just not that popular. That's okay. They do build a niche audience, and it works. Sometimes it turns out your actual opinion is popular, and that's kind of a luck thing, I think, more than anything. But yeah, you just have to, you can't be afraid. And, I oftentimes will actually, on Twitter, I'll say things in particular on that platform, trying to weed out certain types of audience. I know some people want to say, no, all audience is good. And that's not true. There is some toxic audience. There's some you do not want. And if you build too many of that kind, it's going to backfire. And that's the type that will cancel. Anybody that will cancel because they don't like your opinion, because they think suddenly you're not moral. That's one piece of advice too. You do not want that audience. You can build a big audience off of culture war, but then they will turn on you on a dime and it will be done, in a minute. So I weed them out. I'll say things when I think my audience is going too far in one direction. I'll say something knowing it's just going to upset a bunch of them, and like 2,000 of them are going to leave. Usually it's like 2,000 or 3,000, and I'll just watch the number go down and be like, okay, well now, now they're gone because they're that type. They're the culture warrior type that just doesn't want to hear it. So don't build that audience. That would be my other opinion, my piece of advice, I guess.
The one thing I will say is that going into this sort of thing, it's not going to be easy. Um, build, find your people and build your audience, and be sure that you have an audience that's willing to help fund what you do, because it takes money to do something like this on a daily basis. It takes money to keep these things generating. A lot of journalists don't like to talk about that, independent journalists, but you're always going to have your back against the wall if you're not tied to a corporate sponsor, or if you're not tied to people who really believe in what you do. Just understand you have to start this from a labor of love and a love of informing the people, and understand that you're going to have some hard days, but the rewards are going to be much better at the end of the day. And you're going to be able to look yourself in the mirror and be able to tell yourself that you inform the people. So as far as advice, just be sure you have everything lined up, and don't be afraid to ask your people to support what you do. They will eventually come. It's not going to be easy, but they will come. And don't betray those people who put their faith in you.
Oh, this is a good one. I love this question. Move overseas. And there's like 5 different reasons why, but if you're thinking about going into the media, the absolute worst thing you can do is to try to move up the chain by getting an internship at New York Magazine or the New York Times. You know, work some job, wait tables, do whatever you have to do, work construction, save up a little bit of money, move to some place in the world where it's cheap and you can live for a year, you know, on not that much money, and be a stringer for wire services. That will accomplish a couple of things. Number one, you'll really see the world. You'll see America from a new perspective. You'll learn a foreign language. You'll have a really interesting life, and you'll learn the job in a way that you wouldn't do if you were being an assistant to some columnist at New York Magazine who's going to ask you to find links or something like that. You know, you go work in Venezuela, you're going to learn about the oil business. You're going to learn all kinds of things that are terrifying and real, and that's what the job is about. It's also more fun, and you know, you won't have to worry about all kinds of things that you have to worry about in the States. So that's the one question I think I know the answer to. So
I would say the most important thing is that you have to realize that the internet is a gigantic place, right? There's, at any moment, everybody has, you know, literally millions of choices about what to pay attention to, what to consume. So you need people to pay attention to you, because there's no such thing as good journalism that nobody hears. It's not like art or poetry that you can discover 300 years later and, oh, it's beautiful. Journalism has to affect the society for it to be good, which means you need to find a way to get people to pay attention. And I think the key way to get people to pay attention is to avoid becoming an expert in everything. Like, no one can be an expert in everything. I don't know very much about healthcare policy. I have my values about wanting more people to have healthcare coverage, but I don't know much about the economics of healthcare policy, so I don't write much about it. I try and confine myself, and always have, to 3 or 4 issues at a time in which I've really become an expert, where I just study it and immerse myself in it, so that what I'm saying is unique. You can't get what I'm saying everywhere else or anywhere else, because I have a level of knowledge about it and a certain view about it and a certain ability to understand it that very few other people have. And I think that's the key, is not to try and become an expert in everything, especially if you want to do independent journalism. You got to do the work to be able to understand every part of the political spectrum has a kind of jargon, a lot of different players. And before you can really make a difference, you've got to do the work to understand how it functions. Take whatever you already know, what you're interested in, what your passion is, and build around that. And if you do that, if you find your own voice and the passion that you have that leads you to want to do this, which is also crucial, always keep in contact with that passion, and just devote yourself to a couple of issues where you're really able to offer something unique, you will find an audience. An audience will find you, and that's how you can really make a difference.
Well, that's what frightens me. It's so people like myself, Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi, who already have become kind of publicly known, can switch to Substack, which I've done. And that has been, you know, quite lucrative, and allowed me to continue to do my work, Matt and Glenn as well. But if you haven't established that kind of profile, then it's extremely difficult to get found, noticed, and funded. And what frightens me is that the new generation of journalists who should be, essentially nurtured and carrying on the kind of work that many of us have done. It's impossible for them to make a living, to make a salary where they can. None of us ever got into journalism to make money, of course, but they can't get published and they can't get remunerated for their work, and that is just, again, extremely frightening, because you have whole area with the atrophy of kind of news organizations. You have whole sections of government, especially on the local level, city level, courts, police. They're just going dark, and these people, without any kind of scrutiny, and the scrutiny was always flawed. It was never what it should be, but without any kind of scrutiny, then these centers of power will just do whatever they want, and you can't take on corporate power because they'll sue the hell out of you. I mean, Cy Hirsch's last great investigative piece for the New York Times was on this multinational in Gulf and Western, which was all mobbed up. They were all linked to the mob. And in the end, the Times was so frightened, they wouldn't run it. They neutered it, and he quit. And he said, at that point, I could still take on governmental power, although I don't think we can anymore. But I realized we can't take on corporate power. And that's what I've been watching over the decades that I've been a journalist. They have just, the bars are coming down. And then, of course, wholesale surveillance makes it impossible for whistleblowers. Obama was awful on this, using the Espionage Act to go after whistleblowers. And then you're essentially left. Either people hack material, Chelsea Manning or Edward Snowden, and get it out to the public. Julian Assange, who did not hack, by the way, he's a publisher. And the Trump administration used the Espionage Act against Julian. The first time it was always used against whistleblowers. Now it was, for the first time, used against a journalist, is being used against a journalist. So we're essentially ending the capacity for a free press. And I would argue we virtually already ended the capacity of journalists to shine a light into the inner workings of power. And that's very, very frightening, because that is a major step towards authoritarianism.
Talk to people. Do not be afraid of picking up the phone and talking to people. You can't do it all by reading documents. You need people to explain to you how to read the document, which documents to go for, and to tell you things that aren't in the documents. So, and I guess that would be the one piece of advice, because I think that younger journalists sometimes get too caught in the screen and the text, and that you need to just pick up the phone, reach out to people, go see things, do ground truthing, as we used to call it when I was a reporter in Iraq. Like, go and see, well, they claim they rebuilt this or that. Well, let's drive down there, and look at it. So they said they spent $2 million here on this power plant or this water system. Let's go check it out. What does the road look like? Oh, the firm is connected floor, unknown Texas construction firm gets a contract to the Bush administration to rebuild one of the main highways in Iraq. Let's go look at in Afghanistan. Let's go look at the highway. Is it falling apart after 3 months, or isn't that? So that's another thing, right? Going and seeing.
I would say probably to get a real job and have kids, have a happy life and support independent media. Don't go chasing waterfalls. And definitely don't try to be me. I mean, anyone who wants to be me is sick. But I meant everything I just said. Really, don't try to do it. Just, it's something that will find you. And beyond that, I believe anybody can do journalism. And so if you do have a real job or a part-time job, and I think actually one of the best ways to get into journalism is to have a part-time job where you have a few days to work on your journalism and you're not relying on it to pay you. So you don't, that's how you maintain your independence. And anyone can do journalism. It's very easy. I mean, you're just reporting what you see, and you can put yourself into places other people can't go very easily. Communicating it, finding a platform might be difficult, but if you have something unique to offer, I mean, I'm always down to publish it or to promote it. And what's needed right now is real reporting. Like, there are so many YouTube shows, there are so many pundits out there, so many people saying, saying the same, sort of like amplifying one another on social media. But real reporting means you actually either go to the field, you're doing FOIAs, you're investigating, you're calling people, cold calling, and asking questions, and doing the work that mainstream media isn't doing. And that's how I started out. Like, I started out, well, I'll talk about my background a little bit more in a second, and it's pretty well known to many people. But I started out I was renting a cheap place in LA. I was covering mostly like the Christian right and the groups that I thought were the base of George W. Bush and the support base of the Iraq War and the whole war on terror. And, I was going out and interviewing their leaders and just covering their conferences and being everywhere they were. I had, at the time, the advantage of writing for Salon.com and a few other publications, The Nation, at the dawn of online media, Alternet, when it was still on the cutting edge. And I was working part-time jobs, like I was temping, substitute teaching, delivering food, just because, well, there wasn't really any way of raising money online except maybe if you could like put a PayPal button on your blog.
Mm-hmm.
And that gave me independence and the ability to have like a few free days to do the work I wanted to do, or to kind of to drive to one of these conferences or something like that. And I would call DC all the time. I'd call Congress. I remember I did an investigation on the coup in Haiti against John Bertrand Aristide. I definitely went into the red on that one. But I was speaking to the coup leaders themselves from my room, from my bedroom. They would speak to me. I'd just get their, I would find a way of getting their numbers and I'd call them straight. I talked to Jean-Philippe. This guy was the one who personally stormed the presidential palace and now is in a U.S. prison. They all agreed to talk to me. So I don't see why they wouldn't talk to you if you want to be a journalist. Like, you could do it, but you need to do real journalism. And I come from a journalistic pedigree. My father was a journalist. So like I had certain advantages that other people might not have. That's where my privilege comes from. It doesn't come from having tons of money. Like, I never had a trust fund or anything. I had to work, but the privilege was like, knowing how to write, getting a first-class education, and, having like being able to get the email address of an editor at Salon.com. So I think a lot of people now coming up do have some advantages I didn't have. Like, there was no Patreon, there was no, crowdfunding, and self-publishing was much harder than it is now. But at the same time, you get lost if you're not coming up with something real.
That's right. That's right. And one thing I'll add too is like, you have to believe in yourself, because there's a lot of, and Max, you can probably attest to this too. Like, there's a lot of ego. There's a lot of ego sometimes, like in this space. So like, you have to believe in yourself. You can't like sit back and hope, well, I hope this person likes what I do, before you trust yourself and you believe in what you're doing. You have to believe in yourself, and you have to be your best cheerleader. Like,
well,
seriously.
You have to do it because you have to do it because you have a belief, like a transcendent belief in this mission, and that you see journalism as a tool for changing society. At the same time, you have to abide by ethics and tell the truth. But otherwise, why not just go into a mainstream job if you don't believe that? And I think, at the end of the day, you're going to be more happy if you do have a transcendent cause that allows you to withstand the attacks and setbacks, whether they're like financial setbacks or personal or whatever. If you really believe in something, that should transcend all of that within reason. But my first advice would be to get a real job and have a family.
Agreed. I agree. Because like none of us, I know all of us at RBN, like we had jobs. Like,
yeah,
it was just like, we didn't just jump in. Like, some people can, some people, like, they may live with their parents and their parents are like, yeah, just go ahead and try to pursue this full time, but most of us, no.
Yeah, I mean, and that's also what connects you to people who you're supposed to be speaking for. I
Yeah.
mean, if you, man, I mean, a lot of people I know who make it in journalism have not had that experience, and it shows. And I think you know, your perspective becomes a lot sharper when you understand how insane policies are affecting regular people, and that comes from being part of the workforce.
Oh, well, I mean, independent news media. I mean, what you do is if you have to have a passion that you want to talk about, and you have to show up and talk about it every day to build an audience. And that's what I did. Now, I don't know how the algorithm exactly works anymore, but when I started, it used to be you had to do 5 to 8 clips a day, and you know, no longer than 10 minutes. Well, that's changed. They reward you now for the length of view. So I do longer videos than I used to, but it takes a lot of work. And so, you know, you have to commit to it. And so if you're serious about it and you commit to it and you have a little talent, you'll be able to be successful in this space, I think.
I mean, I would highly recommend that they instead just pick up a drinking habit. I think that's just a far better choice. No, I want people to be doing the same thing as us, which means to be passionate about these issues and to actually look about what's going on in the world and then to speak about what's going on in the world. So I highly encourage them. But I will say that every video you watch on how to do well on YouTube or those things, it doesn't really apply to people who are speaking about these issues. It might apply to someone putting up skateboard or cat videos, but it doesn't apply equally to us. And many times you can see when you're a new channel, you know, I started a new channel 2 years ago or something because I knew my old one was suppressed. And you can see a lot of growth initially because they apparently have not decided yet that you need to be stopped. But then as you continue to grow, it tends to the algorithm, or maybe it's human beings. You know, I don't always know whether something's done by an algorithm or a human being, but you'll see it become very difficult. And it's like trying to run uphill waist deep in mud, no matter what you try. And it really sucks. But I think we still have to use these tools. You know, I'm not one of these people that's like, delete your Facebook, delete your YouTube, because these are tools that can be used by activists and those who want to create change in this world, who want a sustainable and a peaceful world. They are tools that can be used, and the tools, you know, we're up against the largest goddamn power this world has ever seen, the largest military, the largest corporate governance this world has ever seen. And no one said it was going to be easy. And no one said they were just going to let you walk in and change things. So I think keep using the tools, but look to have a lot of tools in that tool bag. Look for a lot of different outlets. You know, maybe the ones that are not censoring as of yet, and just try and get the message out there in a lot of different places, I guess.
A couple of things. Talk about number one, read a lot. Read various sources. Read all the sources they tell you not to read. Find a lot of alternative media. Find media all over the world to read, right? Yeah, look at the Washington Post or Politico and stuff like that. Look at RT, look at Press TV, go to antiwar.com, go to, you know, find these various places that you can read that are alternative stuff that they tell you not to read. Read all of that so that you could get a very good view of, you know, a broad view of things. Also, whatever, focus on issues that you enjoy, that you like, that you find interesting, because then it's not work. If it's work, you're not going to do it for so long. So focus on the things that you're interested in. Read a lot about the things that you're interested in, and also things that you're interested in. Focus on the history. Find out, how did we get here? How did this happen? What are the history of these people? When you're looking at particular countries, look at their culture and their history. Their politics are a result of history and culture. You can understand, if you don't need to know. For instance, I've studied Russia for years. I found it interesting. My mentor for years was, I've told many people, Paul Robeson Jr. He went to school in Russia. He knows the Soviet Union. So I found Russia interesting for years. So I studied it. I studied the history. I studied the culture, and I understand how they think. Take things into account, not just the political thing. One of the things that I talk about when I talk about the way Vladimir Putin views the world and the actions he's going to take is this: he's a black belt. If you understand how martial artists think when it comes to conflict, you will understand how he views this conflict, based because martial artists and people who have taken self-defense have a particular view on self-defense and on conflict and how you approach conflict. And you can understand that, and you won't listen to all of this crap about, oh, Putin's just a crazy man, he's going to do this. You'll say, how do martial artists view a conflict? And then you look at what's going on in Ukraine and you're like, interesting, it aligns with that. So don't just look at the factors that everyone else is looking at. Try to find some other angles through some other context through which to view the things that you are looking at, and you'll get some original viewpoints. People want original viewpoints. They don't want everybody on every show saying the same thing. Whatever you do, don't say what everybody else is saying. Don't avoid it. If it's true, but look for some unique angles. That's what people like, and that's what makes it fun.
You know, I have some people, I mean, it's really inspiring and very cool. People see me and they're like, hey, how do I do what you do? I'm just about to graduate from college. I'm like, oh, well, let me tell you, you might have to be working for a while. You might have to be working for a while, and you might have to be working while you're doing it. But my advice, I mean, I think the number one thing is to, one, find, like, ask yourself, what is, like, what is really driving you right now? If you're a journalist and you want to cover politics, whether it's global and domestic, like, what's really driving you? Like, what are those issues that you're saying, that's something I need to talk about. I'm always talking about it. It's probably where you should be going. It's probably where you should be starting. It doesn't mean you have to stay there and just do that. But in this time, I've found this out. Especially with the way that, like, algorithms work, especially with the way that people read media, especially, you kind of do have to find, well, it doesn't mean you have to narrow your politics to just one issue, but you do have to find a way to draw threads from whatever issue really drives you. So for me, that's war, that's imperialism, that's geopolitics. That really drives me, and it has for many, many, many years. And I've talked about many different things. I've written hundreds of articles about things that are connected to it, but not necessarily always related. But I've noticed that what's helped me is the more that I can zero in on what drives me, then that will keep me both motivated, and it will make the work manageable, and it will also help navigate what are intense and very frustrating complexities with the independent media landscape, navigating the various ways that independent creators who are maybe kind of all on the same team with us, but not necessarily working together, navigating those contradictions, navigating the platforms that we use, because those platforms, you know, your audience is kind of going to be dictated by what drives you, you know, like that is what will happen. And I think, you know, asking yourself what drives you, and then, like, what medium do you want to do? Like, are you a writer? I never thought I would be doing video, but now I'm doing video and live streams. Like, that's weird to me. Like, if you asked me 2 years ago, hey, Danny, you're going to do that full time, or even like 80% of your work, I'd say absolutely not. And here I am. So what is your medium? Where do you want to begin? And then just hone it. Like, just continue to do it and try your best. I struggle with this. I'm sure you do. Say, like, try your best to emphasize what really does matter, right? Like, try to find ways to emphasize the content, the material, the reading, the writing, all the things that you need to do, the learning. Emphasize that, the collaborating. Emphasize those things as much as you can over the monetizing, the promoting, the, you know, because that is the most that is the most infuriating, because a lot of monetizing and promoting and all of that, it's not just about the money that you make, it is about the visibility, right? And that can be the most frustrating as an independent journalist. Like, how do you get your word out there? How do you get your work out there? And so for me, my personal struggle has been, how do you balance those two things so that you can be healthy and happy in what you do and remain committed to the principles and the politics and what you really care about, like what your end goal is. Like, if your journalism, independent journalism, is for the movement, is for the people, is for bettering people's lives, fighting oppression and exploitation and taking down an unjust and oppressive system of empire and capital and all of that, if that's like the goal of your journalism, whatever you can do to keep yourself as centered on that as possible is the best advice I could probably give, because everything outside of that is gonna be frustrating. Like, you're gonna be frustrated with trying to do stream. If you're a streamer and doing videos, you're gonna find that work incredibly mundane. Like getting the stream together, if you can get help. I have a little bit of help, but if you can get help, it's like, okay, it's great, but you still find it mundane. Like, no matter how much you get, you're gonna still find that shit like really boring. And then the pressure of, like, you start getting in these platforms, and then the platforms have their own agendas, and it's like, oh, YouTube has this agenda and all of this, and you're like, you'll be fighting with that too. And it's not a battle you'll win. So that's the only advice I can give on that end. Is like, probably the best one is like figuring out what you want to do, what drives you, what's your medium. Do your best to center yourself on what you find really matters. You're not going to be able to avoid the frustrating things, but as much balance as you can with that, making sure that you stay grounded on what matters, because a lot of people burn out. A lot of people stop. A lot of people end up just doing something else because it's frustrating. I've seen a lot of people, they start off really strong. They go really hard. They really commit. I mean, I find myself one of these people. It's like, I felt probably this way, more than a few times in the last 6 months alone. So, how do you combat that? How do you take care of yourself? How do you engage and collaborate so you feel as whole as you can? Because
I think we started around the same time. I could be wrong. You might have started a little bit before me, but in that 2-year span, at least for me, I've seen a lot of people come and go.
Yeah. A lot of people come and go. And, especially in what I focus on, I can't, when it comes to like geopolitics, which is like a whole section of YouTubing and streaming and, media, the number of people in the United States doing that it's pretty low. Like it's not that many people. And the reason for it are many, but I think one of the biggest reasons is that people just can't afford it. I mean, how can you afford to do this work as often as it takes to become visible? Because the only way you do is you got to go as much as you can. I mean, that's how this media ecosystem works, and not a lot of people can do it. And so if you already are facing the conditions we talked about with the anti-war movement in the United States, this low point, and you got Democrats rabidly anti-Russia and also anti-China, but they focus on Russia. The GOP folks, they focus on hating China, and then all the other wars they all support equally. So if you have that dynamic and most ordinary people are not really thinking about foreign policy, then you're already at a disadvantage in terms of just day to day. But then you add in, well, how do you do it without going broke? I just happen to be lucky enough where I'm in a situation where, I can't put time on it. And I don't need to focus on being the sole primary income, because if I did, I probably would be doing a lot less of it. I mean, I was for a while. When I started, I wasn't focusing on this as much. Like, it takes a lot of time, for the first year of my channel, I was like, I can't really put in a lot of time into this because it's a lot of time with not a lot of not a lot coming back, and I had to work, and I had to work a full-time job. I had to, take care of other priorities and issues, and it just so happened last year I've been able to put in more time to it. So these are the things that I think anyone coming into independent journalism are going to face, unless there's very few, but some do exist, where it's like, yeah, they have some institutional backing somewhere, but
yeah,
it's very few and far between. You could probably find you couldn't find those true independent media. You can't really find that. You can't even fit those in your hand, count them on your hand, the number of institutions that can actually support you while you're on this journey.